When do they show the slides? At the beginning? Great.
Good evening. We're a little late in getting started this evening, and I'm sorry for that. We have some guests who flew in this evening just especially to be with us tonight, and by the time we gathered and had dinner, I'm sorry if we've kept you waiting a little bit. Welcome to the third evening in our Design Forum series that is being presented under a grant from the Graham Foundation, Modern Architecture Los Angeles beyond Neutra Schindler. We have a very exciting group with us this evening, who you will become acquainted with as the evening progresses. We'll start.
It wakes everybody up.
Can you hear me in the back? Pierre Koenig, who was a graduate of USC, did his first house in 1952 while he was still in school. Worked in the offices of Rafael Soriano, Quincy Jones, Edward Fickett, and Kirsten Wright and Wright. He designed two of the case study houses that were sponsored by Arts and Architecture magazine. He's been teaching at USC since 1962, and in the last few years has been involved with planning work. Our next panelist is Calvin Straub. Cal was born in Macon, Georgia, went to school in Pasadena, attending high school in Pasadena City College, and was a graduate of USC. He worked in the office of Arthur Gallion, who was then the dean at USC, practiced in the firm of Buff, Straub, and Hensman from 1954 to 1969, taught at USC and touched an awful lot of people who might be out in the audience through the years of 1946 to 1961. Since 1961, he's been at Arizona State University, and since 1975 has been chairman of the Faculty of Architecture there, and has continued his practice of architecture in Arizona. Our next panelist is Bernard Zimmerman. Bernard is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley. Pardon? As a young man, he worked in the office of Richard Dorman. He also worked in the offices of Charles Clement, Daniel Mann Johnson Mendenhall, Welton Beckett, and Victor Brewer. In his own practice since 1957, and has been teaching at Cal Poly Pomona since 1967.
That's before Venturi was popular. This is a project with Jim Pulliam.
Great job.
Okay. And our next panelist is Daniel Dworsky. Dan is a graduate of the University of Michigan. In his first year in Los Angeles, he worked with Rafael Soriano. And he's been in his own practice since 1952. What happened, David? Okay, blank. That's our panel for this evening. That's great. As we did at the last session.
Hello.
We're going to show just a very few minutes of highlights of the last panel discussions on video. So hopefully that set is working for the back part of the studio, and this one for the front, this one for the panel.
40 years ago, we were all pretty sure of everything. I mean, we knew what was going on, and we knew exactly what was going to save the world. And I think right today, at least this group, we're really not as sure as we were then. And we're glad that there's another group that's really sure, and that they're going to really come on. But then,
you know, the houses that George Washington Smith, Luther Riggs, Roland Tote, and some of the people that are long gone now were doing really recognize the problems that we face today of energy. Their houses were, they had nothing like called air conditioning. They didn't take much heat because they were damned well designed. Yet we thought that we could live with glass, 4 glass walls, every exposure, and pump enough cold. There's no way to pump enough cold air in to cool the west wall. We're damned illogical. You can call it modern or whatever you want to call it, but it's illogical. You better damn well look at some of the things that were done under a condition of logic instead of the dramatic thing with what's going to be published. And, you know, if you look at the last 20 years of architectural magazines, excuse the expression, but it's a bunch of crap. Influenced by bankers, John, that gives you your turn to go.
Fighting the bankers all my life because they're the ones that stop all progress. They don't allow anything to be done that hasn't been done exactly the same way for the past 50 years. And I can prove this a million ways. So all of my clients have done it on their own. It's the only it's getting to be a big pain in the neck and a bore and a disgusting mess. And there's so much unnecessary baloney involved that I hate to start a new project. I don't know who's going to build it. I don't know. It takes me 6 months to get a permit. All my jobs have been stopped by the Coastal Commission. The whole thing is a mess, that's all. But I'm still interested in architecture. I'm still interested in architecture.
I suppose we're all very impatient, but when you analyze it historically, a serious movement, say that started with the early Romanesque, and before it flowered into the Gothic, maybe this was a matter of 400 years at least. And we're in the period now that maybe the modern movement is 60, 70 years old, and we're impatient. Maybe 10 years where there's some very vital juices flowing and things go just right, and then all of a sudden there's a reaction because there's a feeling that maybe this isn't quite the right direction, and we reverse from the mainstream. And these things happen, and we get impatient and we wonder whether everything's going crazy, but the main thing is that creative people have the adventurous spirit, adventurous attitude and the spirit and the guts and the nerve to dare.
Okay, so we'll take off from this point. If the mics aren't working, yell out and we'll just talk louder from this point because it sounds like they're not. Well, can you all hear me anyway?
Hello.
Because the mic system seems to really have gone weird tonight.
Hello.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're the generation that produced the 20 years of crap, right? Since most of us started it around 1950, and that's about 25, 26 years, I guess. And Whit Smith said they had all the answers in those days, which none of you could probably hear, or didn't have. They thought they had the answers 40 years ago. I think many of us thought we had the answers 25 years ago, 30 years ago. And I'd kind of like to take off from that point of view tonight. One, whether the modern movement is dead. 2, whether what has been produced is all crap. 3, whether society really can't deal with modern architecture at all. And 4, what were our goals, where are we going, and so forth. And so I'd like to kind of toss it off to Cal Straub, who is really synonymous with architectural education in Southern California throughout the 50s. Probably influenced many of you, I hope, who are in the audience tonight. And Cal, what were your dreams, say, in 1950, and what do you think about today?
Thank you, Ray. I don't know if this thing is working or not. Good, great. Let me say it's great to be here and see many good old friends and a few good old enemies, and which is always kind of fun. And it's exciting to be back in L.A. in a certain strange kind of way. But I never know when I get off that damn plane at L.A. International where I've landed, and it all seems slightly mad, and I had 27 horrendous experiences between there and here, but it was all kind of fun. But Shelly assured me that I could reminisce a little bit, and I hope I won't be too big a bore, but I'm sorry I missed the first sessions, and I wish I could have seen Rafael. I don't know if any of you remember him back in that period. He was really a marvelous guy, and I hope he still is, full of piss and vinegar and raising hell with everybody, you know.
He just hates the hollyhock bush.
He hates the hollyhock bush. Well, at that time, I remember he was madly violent against all young people who wore patterned clothes. That wipes out all of you, you know. Anybody with the impure, he only wore black shirts and black ties, and anyone who had goodies on their shoes, perforations or patterned clothes, he just raised hell with. And I do remember a kind of an experience, and I will reminisce to this one degree, is that we knew about Rafael, and I think this was late 40s, 48, 49, and we thought he'd be great at SC, even though I didn't totally share his point of view. And so he invited me out to his office, and I went, and it was some dismal apartment in Hollywood, some terrible place. Pierre tells me he worked there. And I remember going in, and it was chaos, just piles and piles and piles of things around. And he invited me to sit down, so I cleared this place on a couch, and this is true, so help me God, and there was an old fried egg sitting on the cushion. Honest to God. All around the walls were these wonderful, serene drawings. Beautiful, simple buildings and madness reigning all around. Most exciting guy and a most exciting experience. And as you say, Ray, the most exciting time to have been a young architect, because it was all about to happen in this period, right after the war, and everything was going to happen, and maybe arrogantly, but with great confidence, we thought we could do it. And this was an exciting moment to be there. And I look back in many great stories about the Lautners and these people, and I think many good things were done, and many exciting things did happen. But I think also some bad things. May I take just 1 minute, because I want to get on a soapbox. Shelly, and with all apologies, when I read and saw your very nice brochure, it reminded me of something that, and maybe I'm sounding a little pedagogical, but I know so many people, and I think I was one at the time, that felt that modern architecture began with Richard Neutra and Schindler and Mendelssohn. And it really wasn't true. You know, it really wasn't true. And I believe this is something we have to remind ourselves of, is that this is a thing, and I'm sure you know Mr. Mumford, a man I respect, maybe you do or do not, but in his very good book, The Roots of American Architecture, and he points out that, and I think we're aware, that this has been going on, as Carl Maston said, for a long time, that there have been men of concern. There have been people writing. There have been people trying to find a form for whatever this civilization we live in, and to give it some direction and give it some belief for a long, long time. And I think this is important maybe to our discussion tonight, to remind you that it was not only such people as Green and Green and Irving Gill and Maybeck, whom we all know, but do you know William Wurster? And do you know his great wife, Catherine Bauer? And do you know J.R. Davidson? And do you even know people like Reginald Johnson, who was a great eclectic architect, but who built Baldwin Hills Village with Clarence Stein? And there were men of principle, I'm convinced, and men of belief and men of concern who were part of what I would call the evolving quality, the evolving nature of architecture in California and the United States. But California somehow particularly. It always has attracted all of us kooks, and it always has attracted people who were concerned. And I think that there had been this kind of mainstream that had been evolving consciously or unconsciously. And I think this is an important point. I really think it was unconsciously. I think it was people who believed in certain things. You read the writings of Gustav Stickley and that marvelous little book, The Craftsman Magazine. And then you read the letters from Wright and Sullivan and Green Brothers and all these people, and they were really concerned about not form for form's sake, but a quality of life, a way of life, principles of living. And I think that these things, again, were part of this background. And for perhaps a great simplification, I would call it maybe the California tradition that many of us were not necessarily really conscious of. I knew I grew up in Pasadena. I didn't even know who had done all those great old brown houses out there. I honestly didn't. It was much later that I found out that there was someone called Henry Green who was still alive. But I think that there was a consciousness on the part of many people in California towards a direction. Now, what has this got to do maybe kind of to what we're talking about? And I'm proposing it because I haven't heard it discussed too much. I think in the moment of the 50s, something very special happened because, as you remember, Mr. Neutra arrived in the late 20s, Schindler came, Mendelssohn came, the great excitement of the whole European thing. I don't know about you, but I remember the first time I saw the Barcelona Pavilion. I absolutely flipped out. I can still get thrills over looking at that building. What an exciting thing, you know, a whole new concern for space, a whole new direction about space and structure. And I think this was a meaningful thing. And I think that the Europeans at this time, and I'll get off my lecture kick, but I think it relates, brought an influx into the mainstream of what I would call the tradition that had been evolving, and I hope is still evolving here for a long time, and brought a fresh breath of life. I know how exciting Mr. Neutra was to me. I used to trail around in the back of his car, and he was very kind to me, and I would go see jobs with him, and it was a thrilling and a wonderful experience. And I think that was true for many of us. But I think that too many people think this was it. And if you think, and let's say what was the California tradition, if you can try to summarize it in a few words. And I think that there has always been in the West, and you read John Muir, I don't know if you've read any of his great writings, and Thoreau and people like this, a real concern for environment, a concern for landscape, a concern for the site, a concern for man and his relationship to nature. And I think this was one of the great traditions of that school. I think there was another thing coming all the way from Morris in England, through Stickley, through the Greens, through Wright. I think there was a great love and affection for natural materials. And I think not only natural materials, but certainly the whole philosophy of craftsmanship, extending into the social philosophy of craftsmanship. And I think this was part of it. And I think there was something that I remember Proctor Melquist at Sunset and a group of jurors sitting around, they said, what is a California house? What is a Western house? Not trying to be provincial, but there was something different. And nearly all the people at that meeting said, there's a quality of humaneness about it, a concern for people, a concern for the quality of their lives. Now, great oversimplification to me, but I see those as a main point. I see from Mr. Neutra, Mr. Schindler, Mr. Mendelssohn, and certainly the influence from abroad of Mies and these people, this great concern for architecture and planning as a social force. This hit us in the 40s and 50s. Wow, no one had ever thought of this. And then we also suddenly saw the whole concept of technology, that how it might solve some of these problems that even then I think we could start to see ahead. Not too clearly, but begin to see the concept of the problems of our time, 70s. And then I think, of course, this question of the great space, the new aesthetic of structure, all of these things came in. To me, and the thesis is, I think at this moment in the 50s, a synthesis took place. I think there was a fusion in all of the young architects at the time. And again, I don't think intellectually or consciously. I think we sensed certain things that were valuable in the past. I think we saw excitement in the future, and a type of work began to occur. Lots of stumbling around, lots of fumbling around, but trying to see how both of these, even Mr. Neutra, if you recall, about this time, did the great little Nesbitt house, all in redwood and brick. You know, that was heresy for Neutra, to do a redwood and brick house.
He wouldn't get the job.
And he didn't, but it was a marvelous house, however, and many of those great things out on Silver Lake, you know.
We all have a price.
Oh, heavens, you think so? I have a better opinion of him than that. I think he kind of thought out.
Nothing wrong with having a price.
No, agreed, I agree. Maybe it was too heavy a price for Mr. Neutra to pay sometime. Yeah, but he did thaw out. I remember Gregory Ain, Garrett Eckbo saying to a group of students about 1960 who were working him over about something he had designed, and he said, fellows, he said, I'm not as pure as I used to be. He said, I'm a little too old and a little too wise for that. And if you equate purity with dogmatism, maybe Garrett had grown up a lot. Maybe Richard had grown a little bit too, in my opinion. But out of that, I see something else. One last point, exciting. I think there was a period, and Shelly says that there hasn't been too much talk. There was a man named John Intinza, and I'm not sure if you know about John, but I think he was a most significant person in Southern California. He was a voice. His magazine, Arts and Architecture, was a focus. Granted, it was a little precious at times, a little esoteric at times, a little sweet at times, but it was really an exciting voice. And I think it brought much of this synthesis together, showed many points of view at that time of what was happening. And I think it did more than just do that, because it was a voice about what was happening in Southern California in that period all over the world. I told Pierre tonight at the table, I ran across an old issue of the Architectural Review, which is Richard's magazine in London. I don't know if you know it. And there was an article in there, and it was exciting to me to look back because they had just published Arts and Architecture, our case study house 20, and pictures of Pierre's number 21. And I think I'm sort of paraphrasing Richard's comments that Arts and Architecture represented an incredible level of sophistication that has almost become taken for granted throughout the world in the work in Southern California. Now, those were fairly exciting words to look back on, and I think this was what was happening. And I think that there was some kind of unique synthesis that was happening here. And I think this happened, in my eyes, maybe through the 60s. And then the question that I'd like to toss to the panel is, what the hell happened? Why did it go away?
I'm not sure it really lasted through the Cal. I certainly share your attitudes about the Southern California movement through the 50s, and I think the Arts and Architecture as a magazine helped to generate this. And then I don't know really what took place. I know, Dick, your operation, the way you were working through that period was somewhat similar to some of us, and Dan, your beginning work was that way, and of course Pierre worked somewhat different from the rest of us, I think, but yet I think with a similar attitude, which was very much part of the Arts and Architecture, and really has always been categorized more as the Southern California, movement itself. I'm just wondering, when you say this and when you bring it out quite as strong as you do, it almost seems that architecture is really led around by the nose by the publications, and therefore once the publication left the area, did that then make people start to change, and did the Eastern attitude start to set in, and then did those in the West who wanted to then be published in Eastern magazines or in the magazines totally start to change their attitude towards the way they design? I'd hate to think so, but I'm not so sure that that wasn't part of the cause and part of the change, and I think maybe part of the sickness of architecture in general is that I'm not sure that, even though I think so many of us had a very strong point of view about what we felt was right, that once magazines no longer were willing to accept this as a way, to design, or an avant-garde manner, or whatever you want to call it, that there wasn't a change. I don't know. What do you feel about this, Dick? Dorman?
Well, I think that my opinion is that during the 50s there really wasn't a lot of crap. I think we were, so to speak, I think there was a struggle for all of us to take our training and to implement it into something we felt that was indicative of how we really wanted this thing to go, and how our training had developed us, and how we thought architecture might develop from our own abilities. If you all remember, and maybe some of you don't, there was a chair called the Hardoi chair. And it was a bent metal thing with canvas slung in between it. The time that came out, it was almost like, this was avant-garde. And I watched this thing progress. Within 3 or 4 years, it was kind of made by, Akron. And pretty soon it was accepted by everybody. It was a matter of a process of people becoming aware of what you were doing and what architects were doing in this locality. And I disagreed with John Lottler, who bewailed the idea that the financial institutions weren't accepting his designs. Well, maybe they didn't work. I never thought his work ever worked anyhow, and I can understand why the banks wouldn't provide a loan. But I think that I've never had any trouble. Maybe I got a banal, my architecture is so banal and commonplace that it's acceptable by all the banks, but this has never really been a problem with getting loans for what you do. It might be a problem of the clients having enough money to instigate the thing and get it off base to where it might have the money to go into financing. But nevertheless, I think that it was a matter of a learning period in the early 50s. And I think that a learning period not only for us architects, but for the people who wanted to build and do something nice, for the banks to accept a little more provocative architecture. And I think that we were all struggling to get a toehold and to do some things. And I think that in the 40s and the early 50s, there were sporadic amounts of work here and there. And you could point to something over here and something over there. And they're really far between good architecture. It was pretty much commonplace tracts. It was the rashness of the great tract builders. They went in just groves of 200 and 300 to up to 1,000 projects going, because everybody wanted housing. Everybody was in this enamored situation of building right after the war. We were caught up into this wave of building, and with our new abilities and our new tools and our new directions and I'm a great admirer of Cal, the kinds of things that he taught in school, we were all afire to do these really wonderful things. And I think that we didn't compromise too much in what we knew at that time. I think the magazines helped to propagate this to some extent, but on the other hand, I think that I never really looked at it in terms of I was designing, or I don't think the people I was with were designing for magazines. We were just trying to get some modern architecture out there and doing our best to use our tools and our abilities to design something.
Magazines weren't very powerful
No.
here, or read.
No, we were always grateful if somebody got a hold of something we did and published it, but on the other hand, we took every client and cherished him and tried to get the best we could out of it and do a real good job. And I really don't think that, in my own opinion, that magazines, they had an effect, and they propagated in a way our work, but I don't think that any of us at that period were looking for design consciousness by having it appear in a magazine. And we were looking for a client that would accept us and give us a chance to do a good piece of modern architecture. That's the way I look at it.
Well, I agree. In those days, I think we were. Then I was just wondering what happened. Cal's question was what happened in the 60s and 70s. I think as many kind of tossed off that point of view and tended to, I think, move in other directions. And why the other directions, Dan?
Of acceptance of the few good pieces of architecture that were produced in the 50s. It was difficult to get the public to accept, or your clients specifically, to accept good work during the 50s, and because it wasn't accepted by the public for some time, there was a period of a lull in the enthusiasm that had developed, let's say, during the war years and just after the war years. By the way, when Cal mentioned about Soriano, I spent a year in that apartment of Soriano's working. And it was probably my fried egg, right? But talking about fried egg, one day I came to the office, and I had been there, about 8-9 months, and I decided my office space was his little breakfast nook, which wasn't a breakfast nook by then because it was piled high with old drawings, records. He played records all day long, and every record was one of Bach's works. And it was a great atmosphere to work within. But anyway, one day I came to work and I said, I'm going to clean that stove. And I spent the whole day just cleaning the stove. So it was just a peculiar experience. And
Put on your time card?
yeah, right. I got my $50 a week. But also, I was affected by John Intenza, who recommended that I talk to Soriano in the first place. And there was a unique situation in California in Los Angeles at that time, and John John was the center of quite a bit of that force. But the excitement, at that time we had some of the tools and we didn't have the clients, and we struggled through a period of trying to learn ourselves what this whole field of modern architecture was, with everyone around wanting other than modern architecture. So it was a very difficult period, and the extreme building boom that occurred diluted everything, diluted everyone's efforts towards really trying to achieve something great during that period, except for a few that struggled on some very outstanding work. And some of Ray's work, I think, falls into that category.
Bernard, you look like you're chomping at the bit. After John and Tenza left, we had our Don Quixote of architecture. I think that's Bernard Zimmerman. He used to call, at least he called me up, I think he called most of us up and say, what are you doing that's good these days in architecture? And he would come around to your office to check you out to make sure that you were doing okay. And that kept us all on our toes. Bernard, why don't you, you look like you're ready for next week. all the rest of us are rather casual, but he looks pretty much like he's from one of the big offices now.
There used to be two of me. And this is my first suit since there's one of me. I don't know yet. I'm still looking. First of all, I find it very unusual that I'm sitting between two stick architects. I mean, because I really care not for the stick architecture approach. I mean, I thought it was, and I really didn't know very much about architecture as a child or as a kid. All I knew is that I lived in Boyle Heights. The Mexican Americans didn't have sidewalks, they didn't have housing, and I wanted to do some housing, and I got to the University of California by hook or crook, and then I thought there was an essence of architecture to provide housing for people. And then it all started. Then you find out about the history and all those things. And it occurred to me even then in the very early time that industrialization had an answer. That industrialization was going to do it. I didn't know about Conrad Waxman at that time. I didn't know about Richard Neutra. Funny thing happened to me. I grew up at the Jewish Community Center in Boyle Heights, and it turned out Rafael Soriano had designed that building. Now, whether peripherally that building had some influence over me, I don't know. But I remember the thin band windows, just like this building out here. Someone said it was a warehouse, and I thought it was a great place because that's where I got my social substance. That's where I got to interact with people. I think what really happened in the 50s is that you could sort of divide the history between the post-war and the pre-war. In the 1900s, architecture didn't develop in Southern California and the United States because, especially in California, because there were some architects showing leadership. There were some people who had dreams and hopes and philosophical thoughts that they could identify with. That was the time when people were thinking about socialization. There's always the utopians, and I don't know exactly in planning where the utopians exist in date and time, but I assume it existed around that time because there were dreams that, wow, we could go to California and build a new life. We didn't have to live in the slum dwellings of New York. We didn't have to suffer the climatic conditions. People would come all over to California and to Los Angeles City Terrace because of health problems. Asthmatics would come to City Terrace. Jack LaLanne, Anthony Quinn. No, seriously, Jack LaLanne was a very sick child. And I grew up in that area. It seemed to me, it turns out I found out I was sick too. But what it is that there were the kind of people that hired, I'm not talking about the green and green, which is pretty stuff. I love that stuff. It's a transplant from the Orient. I really think it's terrific. Or, all that fussy detailing, which is beautiful, and you put it on a mantelpiece and you save it. It's a piece of sculpture. But I'm talking about the breaking point when Schindler decided to part from Frank Lloyd Wright. And I don't know if you know the history of that issue, but it's a classical example when Schindler finally broke away from Frank Lloyd Wright with the Hollyhock House. He came out here to supervise the Hollyhock House, started to get some jobs of his own, started to work with Philip Lovell. There's an apartment house on Griffith Park Boulevard. And in this apartment house, it's a stucco box with punch-out windows, and it's the formula, you know, that if you want to do something inexpensive, which is expensive today, you fall into that formula. And Schindler had put the garage doors, and the garage doors is the front piece, and then in it there's some concrete sculpture pieces of the block type that Frank Lloyd Wright and Lloyd Wright did. On the second unit, which is very similar, he decided not to put that sculpture effect on. And he said, no more ornamentation, no more BS, no more bullshit, you see? Because the essence of architecture lies in the purity of itself, because the clients that were coming to him were dreamers. They were dreaming about purity. They were teachers. They were people in the hope that they could have a piece of architecture. I mean, if you talk to the people who were Schindler's clients, they didn't have much money, but they had a lot of dreams. These were the people who were involved with socialization of the society. These are the people who joined the Progressive Party. These are the people who dealt with Henry Wallace, you know, and took the risk of possibly being a communist, and some of them were considered communists. You know, I understand now it's popular that you fought, you know, the Un-American Activities Committee because that's a goodie today. But in those days, you were damn scared. And I understand there's a film called The Front that just tells you about all the problems, and it's all true. So those people had dreams. They had hopes. When people came to Neutra, they had dreams. And Neutra had dreams because he believed in industrialization. His greatest hope was that people would realize that you can have a great house on a 60 by 70 foot lot. And he built his own house on that 60 by 70 foot lot with small rooms but lots of space, and transferred the space. Now what really happened? It seemed to me that people like Pierre, who was in this area, people like Craig Elwood trying to do an industrialized product. I don't know who else was here. Soriano, I guess, was the leader. Soriano must have picked it up. I haven't talked with Rafael, you know, in terms of where he picked it up from, but I know he did work for Neutra, and he was very proud of it. See, you had that group going, and then you had like the romanticists, as if there's some separation between industrialization and romanticism. For instance, if you're not with Frank Lloyd Wright, you don't have crafts. Well, that's ridiculous. You know, industrialization can provide crafts by letting people be the craftsmen and the machine producing the housing, if that's the essence of our times, which I believe it is. So you had like Harlow Hamilton Harris here on this panel, and he was telling how nice it was and how splendid it was, the Hollyhock House, and Soriano would say it's a bunch of junk, you know, that industrialization was taking place, and we denied that industrialization to take place. I think we're going to have that argument all the time, and it really doesn't matter because that's a delusion from keeping us to get where we're going, which is to find housing, to find a way to build architecture for people. And if it's an Airstream trailer, let's get on with it. And if it takes somebody in that Airstream trailer to do a piece of pottery, that's fine too, because you don't have to produce a steel beam while you're living in an Airstream trailer. You know, you can still have your crafts. So I think what happened is individuals practiced architecture and had a great belief because their clients had a great belief. After the war, everybody came to California and they had no belief. I remember there was a fantastic developer coming here. Everybody wanted to have him as a client, you know. John Creedman. And somebody would tell me that John Creedman, if in the East, he wouldn't be the janitor. He used to put Ed Koch's the Coke machine, and here he was a big developer in, Los Angeles after the war. You're a big entrepreneur. Build the junkiest buildings. Anything could go after the war because the clients had no belief other than the dollar. You know, and when Richard tells me how successful he's been getting financing, I could tell you the problems I had with the financiers. Or one financier was one of the best guys, came across and tried to save the Dodge House, Bart Littman, and he was picked on and criticized for that kind of act. You know, I have not found the financiers or the entrepreneurs the kind of guys that really want to manifest great dreams and hopes for man. There was a fellow that talked in Aspen. His name's Sam Keene from Psychology Today. He said what motivated man in the United States for a great many years is that we operate from our center. You know, he showed a donut, and he said, in the center, the American put the dollar bill. You know, he shows the dollar bill in his center. And that's what motivated him. And I'm sure after the war, the dollar bill motivated everybody that came to California. And there were these few guys like Cal Straub and Ray Kappe and a few others that still try to manifest some idea. But the dollar bill really made it happen. The other thing is we were undertrained. We weren't aware that something was going to happen. For instance, I hear architects say, why are there so many students going to architecture school today? We don't need that many architects. The trouble is when the boom happens, you need everybody. There's just not enough talent to go around. And we don't prepare for talent. You know, we don't prepare ourselves for that boom. Because what might be is that we have to prepare ourselves for a double standard, which is we prepare ourselves to earn money when there is the time, and we prepare ourselves to do something else during other periods of time. During the 50s, nobody cared but for the dollar sign. I think you're seeing now a beginning where people are starting to realize that the dollar doesn't matter. You know, if you have Norton Simon's son jump off a building and find out, you know, once you have all the dollars and it's not making it, then you've got to look for something else. And Sam Keen says, we're now going to fill our center with spirituality. I saw Ricky Worman here and it reminded me of Buckminster Fuller's talk in Philadelphia. Bucky Fuller ended his talk in Philadelphia. I said, if you can't share it with everybody, you're not going to share it with anyone, because no one can have it by himself. You see, industrialization will take place no matter what we do. It's going to happen. And what I think happened in the 50s, there was a denial of sharing the work for everyone. You know, and it comes from the bankers saying, well, gee, that stick architecture, that track house that stamps out these shingles and that stamps out these shutters with the little tulips in it, that's what's selling. And that's what we're going to find here. And there's no sense to it. Pierre, you might have some.
No offense. I agree with Cal. I think the post-war period is an extremely exciting time. There were a lot of challenges. Things were not set in a way of life. There were a lot of opportunity, and I think a lot of exciting things happened. And there was a lot of torture too at the same time. Things were not easy. Banks had to be convinced of financing new kinds of buildings. And I think at that time there was produced from that period a lot of individuals who were producing architecture. I don't think the ideas and the creation produced at that time are now absorbed in the mainstream of life. I think that what we're saying is that today, in 1976, we don't find the individual doing the advanced kind of work. And this may be, correct in terms of the time we're living in. I don't know. I don't like it, but I think that's probably where we're at. All of the new ideas, and in my case, going to industrialization to bring in that idea to architecture. And everybody here ideas I know I've seen since that time used, and especially in the area of commercial type architecture as opposed to residential architecture. Well, that's my feeling about whether the movement is dead or not. And I think it's just simply absorbed. And as far as the dealing with problems, I've heard people say, that the architecture modern architecture at that time was produced to be certain things. Well, as Richard said, at that time, I don't think we were conscious of what we were doing. For example, ecology was dealt with at that time in buildings without really understanding or even ever hearing of the word ecology. And a lot of works were done without really knowing before the ideas were formalized. Now we have a name for everything, but in those days it was not like it is now. So you can't really, take the words and apply them and the ideas now to 25 or 30 years ago. They just don't apply.
Can I have a nip back at Bernard? No, Bernard, with all due affection and respect, I never heard so much bullshit in my life. Very academic, exquisite, beautifully said, and so forth. But let me raise just a couple of questions, because I think I know, and I really have a strong conviction of why we are where we are and what our dilemma is. I think that there was a trend in the 60s to sell out to what I would call very simply commercial industrialization. We sold out aesthetically, we sold out literally, physically, operationally. All right, but whether it was or not, it was in the word, in that term. No, I'm not talking about housing now. I'm talking about the idiom, and if I talk about one building, which is my pet peeve in the whole world, and I'll throw it out, is the John Hancock building, the ultimate goddamn symbol of this entire expression. Of 105 stories of monstrosity and ingenuity. All right, but at least it pretends to be an industrialized building. And look we did industrialize buildings. We did buildings that were all completely fabricated in factories, and that's not the end. The point was that that particular direction, and I'm convinced, and I'm sorry, led down a very blind alley. And the blind alley is when I see many people of your age, and maybe you think this is romanticism, which is so easy to knock off and be contemptible about.
I love
and they bring this little book, Guide to the Wood Butcher's Art. How many of you seen that little book, Guide to the Wood Butcher's Art? These are a bunch of little houses that a bunch of kids have put together. And they say, that turns us on. That's exciting. Right. If you've been to all of the new towns in Europe, a great experience of 2 summers ago, came back through Amsterdam, went out to see the whole new city outside of Amsterdam. Giant, industrialized, processed buildings, monstrous, inhuman, unpleasant. We picked up 2 kids who were hitchhiking there on the road. We said, where do you live? They said, we live in there. And we said, do you like it? They hated it with a passion, violent. I said, how do other people feel? They hate it with a passion. And I really think that the end result, and I'm sorry and I'm biased, of the entire industrial commercial direction has produced a bankrupt architect. It doesn't even work anymore. You can't even exist in it anymore. What the hell happens when the goddamn power gives out? And you can call it romanticism to worry about a nicely designed window, but it ventilated a space.
You're missing it.
I'm sorry. And I don't believe that you can defend an architecture that took a dead end towards an industrialized process that ignored the realities of the human condition, that totally ignored the realities of human function, and that absolutely, almost without exception, ignored the realities of the environment. And I'm sorry I feel this way. And I don't think that those sloppy romanticists of William Wurster and Gardner Daly and Henry Hill and J.R. Davidson and all those people were romanticists. I think they were ultimate reality. I mean, believed in reality.
Okay, I'd like to interrupt you.
Yeah, okay, I'll get off my...
I don't want you to keep on, but it's kind of ironic. We're sitting up here, 6 fellows, and we're talking about industrial architecture, and I don't think there's one of us up here who's done industrial type architecture. Pierre hasn't done anything industrialized. All he's done is take steel and adapt it to his clients. It's not an industrialized, reproduced architecture. It's a uniquely designed steel process to one client.
But we followed the dogma. We believed in the
See,
dogma.
it hasn't even come. You see,
Bernard, you haven't done anything industrialized.
but I want to. That doesn't, see. You know,
Bernard, let me tell you what snobs we are.
Bernard,
I'm not a slob. I choose not to be a slob.
No, but I do. Can I say one thing and then I'll shut up? We did an industrialized house. It was totally built in a factory, totally produced, became the prototype for components to be used throughout the industry. And the minute we did it, and
it was
had
a
it
failure.
approved, no, published everywhere, all this sort of crap, we immediately, all of us, abandoned it.
I think.
I mean, in that sense. And this has happened again and again. So are we really interested in...
I think that Soriano, in his early work, was trying to achieve an industrialized house. And, they had the spirit, the houses that he produced, they had the beauty and the spirit that is achievable within the industrialized idiom. I think the challenge today is industry is here, systems of structures and mechanical systems, etc., are here to stay, and it's up to us to utilize this and create the kind of environment within the kind of industrial spaces that we will have to deal with.
Are you doing industrial architecture? Industrialized?
Well, in a sense...
Is each one unique for each client that comes along?
That's true. No, I'm using more systems today rather than thinking in terms of a special kind of sculptural shape or form, because the systems are here to stay, and the methods of construction, the economy forcing us to use materials and forms and that develop systems rather than specialized sculptures.
Name me something like that you've done.
Well, we're working on a project now in downtown Los Angeles that's a series of low-rise to medium-rise office buildings
that repeat themselves.
That repeat a structural system with variations, that repeat a window system with variations, and in itself, the window system. I'm hoping we've had a sample window constructed.
Is it a cookie cutter?
No, it's not a cookie cutter, but it's a system. It's just like this a structural form in front of us. There's a series of parts, but in its totality, it has an excitement which we can enjoy. And I think that the combination the challenges are great to take these industrialized concepts and also create a human environment. But it's possible, I believe, and that's the real challenge in the future.
Right. You know, it's interesting that there was a prediction that in the 70s to 80s we would have 25 million housing units. That was predicted. And we were reaching that goal of 2 million housing units up to 1972, 73, and then it all fell off. You know, not that the demand wasn't there, but the economy wasn't there. And the only reason I feel the economy wasn't there, some group decided to get together, and decided why share right now. You know, it's good to keep it all. And I think there was a change in the administration of government. You know, I think Democrats were out, Republicans were in. And it's interesting to note that we've down to, say, like 1 million housing units a year, something even less than 1 million housing units a year, we got behind. I forgot the gentleman who produced the predictions of housing for the 70 to 80s, but he predicted by 1980, 50% of the housing people will have will be mobile housing. Because you could get around the codes, you can pick it up for $20,000, and they don't even call it modular housing or prefabbed housing because you'd have a different code requirement. You see, so I don't care what you say, Cal, and I don't care what you say, Richard. You see, it's happening. You know, like 25 to 35% of the housing is is mobile housing. And people who are poor are living in it. You see, it's happening, and we're still playing games. You see, first of all, if you see bullshit in me, no, and this is really serious.
Just brown.
Right. If you see bullshit in me, you see.
That have dealt with the issue of housing and repeat housing units. Yet none of us have ever really been able to do that. And then today I start to wonder whether it really is something we really should be shooting for anyway. And the topic of tonight, which we finally gotten to, and some people kind of question what it was all about, is the construction industry gap. And that really meant the gap in cost. None of us have really ever been able to match the cost of conventional housing, which has, I think, been a frustration of some of the people up here, and maybe some of the people don't care at all. I would assume Cal and Pierre, and I know Bernard thinks this way, and I assume many of us do, that when we first started out, that we thought we could probably beat that price at one time by repetitive housing methods. And I know you had a system that was beautiful. It had various methods of, you could solve the needs of many families through a similar process. You had a horizontal and a vertical module that worked out. I've had systems that I felt would do the same thing. Yet, when we do these, they're still more costly than conventional housing. And the only thing that's really met the market, today is what Bernard's talking about, mobile housing. But that's only because they've thrown away the codes and they don't do a lot of things that normal housing does. Yet, as architects, we've really never participated in this game. We've never been the entrepreneur. We've never been the manufacturer. We've never been putting our money out, you know, in the front where we probably have to if we're going to be, you know, part of this whole process. And then it becomes a question, do we want to be a part of this process? And it seems to me at this point in time, most architects are opting out. They're opting for greater individualization, less technology, more art, and the hell with the systems. And I'm just, you know, I think that's sort of, the state of the art is confused at the moment, in my opinion, and that's what we're talking about tonight. And it's just a question of where are we going from here? Are we going the way Bernard is talking, or sometimes I've talked about technology, mobile housing, et cetera, et cetera? Are we going to be more romantic? Are we going to take the attitude of Tim Vreeland, which was in the last month? Isn't it possibly the failure of the modern movement to fully satisfy the romantic yearnings of the human psyche that is leading some of us to look back with a more sympathetic eye to the new traditionalists whose link with their rich architectural past was both unbroken and unashamed? Now, I don't particularly subscribe to that, but there's a whole group of architects, it seems like, throughout the country who do subscribe to that, and we're sort of in that state, of that point. And so I sort of say, which way are we going today? Are we going technologically? You were talking about really high-rise more than technological, the idea of living up in the air, and I'm just wondering which way are we going today? Is an architect an elitist who really deals in individual projects as an artist? Or are we really involved with the building industry, and are we going to do anything in that process? So I'll put that out now.
Let me just answer one thing. You know, I think we live with a great architectural dream, Ray, that architects are the entrepreneurs, the instigator of these projects, and we're not. You know, we're just workaday professionals who are looking to a client for a job. We're looking to the government, we're looking to the county, to the city, or to somebody with enough money and enough know-how to come along with a product and hire us. And we sit there among a sea of many, many other very capable, talented architects and hope that we will be selected to do his job. We don't tell him how to do his job. We don't tell him how much money to spend on his job. We come with our hat in our hand in some degree and hope that we will be selected as an architect. Now, you know, I like all this great discussion we have up here about the idealistic way architects practice, but I think if all of us up here really admit it, we're sitting as professionals in our office hoping that we'll get a client to do a job. If we don't get that client, you know, we're back somewhere else, and we're not practicing architecture. Or if we are, we're doing it for our relatives. It's a matter. If you get down to the groceries. You know, and getting married and having children and protecting yourself in the sense that you're just living, just existing. I'm not talking about anything even above that. You're looking for a client. And I've been around as long as these fellows here, maybe not quite as long as a couple of them, Cal, but I think all of us will have to admit, and Bernard of all people should be talking about it because he's had less clients than all of us up here. And the fact is, you want that client, and you want to do a good job, and you want to do the best architecture you possibly can, but you also want to make a fee, because if you do it for love or money, you're crazy. You know, you've got to make something to stay in existence to get the next job. And it isn't, I'm not talking about dollars and cents, I'm just talking about anybody who is in business, whether he's a carpenter, or whether he's a plumber, or whether he's a land developer, or whether he's a doctor. You've got to pay for your services, and if you charge for your services, or you got to charge for your service. When you charge for your services, people respect you, and you come out and they listen to you. Consequently, all of us up here have accepted jobs. We do jobs, and we do individual work. We don't think industrialization, because none of us up here could instigate an industrialized job. If we have a client that comes along who wants to use us for an industrialized job, we'll be very happy to accommodate him. We'll get involved in it. However, nobody has asked too many of us for industrialized jobs. Perhaps maybe along the way there has been some, but I think that we take what jobs come along, we all go out, we scratch, we compete against each other, and we're all in that same arena to do good architecture, to get the clients, and be accepted. And none of us are going to instigate many of those jobs. None of us.
Well, I choose not to do that anymore.
What?
I didn't do very much before, but I choose not to do what you said. I choose not to keep thinking that the essence of architecture is just getting the client making a buck and getting on with it. You see, I choose to think it's in another direction.
As then how do you produce architecture without a client?
Well, maybe I haven't had much work, but I try to believe in the work I'm doing. And then the next thing is I talk about the future. You see, I only can live today, but I talk about the future.
Talking
you see,
is good.
Conrad Waxman produced a housing system called the General Panel System. And nobody knows about it anymore. Poor Conrad Waxman was just ahead of his times, maybe 50 years ahead of his times. He produced a house, a panel system house that could go together in, 12 hours, or 2 days. Fantastic system, and he finally talked somebody, to give him the money, and it didn't make it. But when you talk to Conrad Waxman, you see a man with dreams and beliefs. He hasn't given up. He believes in the essence of that thought. He believes in the essence of that idea, even if it might be bullshit to you, see?
No, not necessarily bullshit, but obviously bankrupt.
I see. You see, there's a tendency that if you're not wealthy and not successful, and quote the successful image, if you're not a Dapper Dan or a Slick Richard,
What a contrast.
You're not going to make it. That's not true. You see, that's the real funny thing. Like Cal says, who's slick? It reminds me, I was at Zeidler and Zeidler today, a week, to get some clothes, and they said, do this. And I decided, okay, I'll do that. And this is what I got. And there was a little cartoon. There's a little cartoon there. And this young kid coming out of school was coming to see his parents. They opened up the door, and the mother, who's about 50, has a bandana around her head, and she's got a feather, and she's wearing these groovy slacks, and the father is, smoking grass, and the son's wearing traditional clothing. You see, it all happens because, things are going to change. Like the fact that I got this clothes on or not clothes on. When I'm nude, I'm nude, and that's it. You see, industrialization is going to take place if the economic forces still exist. That's it. Whether you agree with it or not. Now, for all these scaredy cats who say, oh, we can't have romanticism, I can make the greatest love in an industrialized house or in a sticking house. There's nothing to do with romance. There's nothing to do with romanticism. They scare you. I can, there's a thing on this essence of centering. There's a thing on the essence of centering. It's called the Pottery Wheel. The centering, and they talk about centering yourself and working with pottery. I'm saying you can have both. I'm saying the life out there is both of them. You don't have to worry. If you want sticky stuff for the carport, do it. But you might buy an Airstream trailer produced for $20,000 in today's market, and you might need both. You see, because you'll need the toilet system and you'll need the plumbing system possibly. Today I talked to my students, maybe housing is going to be out and we'll wear a suit. And the suit will have all its plumbing in it. I mean, really, we keep tying up with old concepts. You take off your suit. Put two suits together.
I have to tell everybody that we had the most exciting table conversation. Bernard has discovered an incredible new diet that you lose weight by making love, And he gave me a long introduction to this course.
Cal refers to it as making love. I think I've learned a new plan by giving love. You see, the essence of love is to give and not to expect anything in return. See, I used to do architecture because I wanted recognition. See, it's Dick Dorman that didn't want to be in, arts and architecture. Gee, the greatest thing for me was to be in arts and architecture. The first project you saw never got built was the case study house number 29 or 30 after John and Ted's, which I had received, and that was an industrialized house which I couldn't get financing for. You see, so I wanted to be in arts and architecture. I thought the essence of my goodness was to be great, not to be myself. And I find if you get in touch with yourself, all those other things will happen. And a lot of people question that, but it's working for me, see? And if that works, fine. And I'm saying once again, that architecture will not be made by this panel. It won't be done by you or me. It will be done by people being secure in themselves and wanting it. And if they have $20,000 in their pocket, that's $20,000 they got. And we're going to have to produce something for $20,000. I'm amazed. I teach at Pomona, and in a city out at Riverside, there's an industrialized Fleetwood doing mobile homes. And the students that graduate from the school there get jobs there. And I'm really jealous. You know, they're doing these homes and they're crappy. But they're in the process. You say, we architects aren't doing it. We architects aren't willing to go out and say, we want to work in the mobile home industry. You know, that's where the jobs are, you see. We architects want to work for Airstream. You know, if we can't work for them, we'll give it to them free. See, I don't care whether you get paid or not for it. If it's right, you're going to get paid for it in the end, because in the end there'll be a return, because people will be housed and their anxiety and their frustration will be taken away. And then we could start loving each other a lot better. And then a lot of architects will say, hey, why not some, you know, architecture in my house? You know, why not some better things? Because they'll want it. See, we keep thinking we can push it on them, and we can't.
Bernard, may I bring a point, because I want to agree with you in a certain way about what you just said here. Good, thank you. Dick said something and Pierre said something, and I was romanticizing about the 50s. But let me say one thing, if I recall all of the bushy-tailed young people in the 50s, and one of the good things is I don't think we were terribly introspective in that period. I don't think everyone was examining their navel or their motives or seeing their psychiatrists or analysts and so on. We were neck deep in it. We were involved, we were excited, we were doing whatever abilities we had and trying to solve problems. I would like to answer my own question, because I think I know, or at least I have a belief of why we lost track with things. Is I think that just at the time when many people were ready to really begin to implement many of the things that they were considering systems, whether they had to do systems in 2x12s or systems in steel, but many people were talking about systems and approaches. I think something happened, and I do believe that we became self-conscious in the whole field. This was the moment in time when I would hear from students or faculty or fellow architects, let's make a significant statement. Let's make a strong statement. Let's really do it. And I am so sick and tired of significant, strong statements that I could vomit. I really could. And I think your California state architect who recently commented, is it not time to think small? Is it not time not to be big and strong and significant, but maybe small and sensitive and concerned? And I really don't think that that's romanticism. I really think that is being the ultimate realism. And I think that we did lose and have lost our direction with our own kind of narcissistic infatuation of our significant statements. I think that the dead end of the precious group. Okay.
Just took a half hour and you're there.
No. But I only happen to believe that you can come at it from a totally different direction, because we had an English visitor recently, and he was at ASU out in the bushes, and he said, L.A. is great. And I said, you're out of your mind. And he said, no, let me point something out to you. Oh, this was more than recently. It was some time ago, because I've thought about it many times. He said, where else in the world do you have so many choices of lifestyles? He said, all those nutty kooks down in Venice or Santa Monica or wherever you live, there's a marvelous way down there. Great. And then Ted Smith and all those guys are down there and having fun and living a lifestyle. And then in Santa Monica, there's another whole world. And then in San Marino, Jesus, could there any place be more square in the world? Just ultimate range. But what's so great about it is that you have your choice. And I have been in new towns from one end of this world to another. And I go from new town after new town, and they are filled with systems buildings and filled with clever technology or quasi-systems buildings. And I look around and what choice of living, what options do you have? And they all look pretty horrible to me. And it's like the young kids in Amsterdam. I said, where would you like to live? In Amsterdam, downtown, where it's alive, where there are choices, where it's alive. And I maybe we're not at opposite ends of the poles, Bernie. I just say, obviously we need all the tools we can get, but for what purpose? And the purpose is a very simple one, for the lives of people and their options and choices. And maybe that's romanticism, but I don't believe so. And I think that we have to get off of our ego trip. I think we've all been on it for a long, long time. And I think it's time to say, maybe we can implement. I don't believe architects are gods. I know that we aren't. We can't do it. We are the result of our society. We all know that.
I think we have to, though, apply the systems technology to architecture today to survive. I mean, economically, the world has these great demands, and they have to be satisfied. And the only tool that we have to satisfy these demands is to utilize the systems approach that is available if we develop it. But, I mean, we all like to do the pottery or to paint a picture or do crafts, and you can combine both. But basically, I believe that the future of architecture is in utilizing the technology and the systems that we have available and to perfect them. I think it's, I remember when I graduated college, Belushi had just completed a building up in Portland, I forget the name of it now, but, or it was in Seattle, I think. Portland. And I remember looking at it and thinking, well, that's the end. I mean, how much further can you go? There's the ultimate of a high-rise office building, and you know, it's all finished. It's like when the patent office was considering closing because there were no possible future patents to be taken out. Well, I think we have to think in those terms now that we are of a generation that have been molding sculptural forms and very personalized shapes using primitive building techniques, masonry, you know, hand-formed concrete structures and so forth, plaster. And we can't lose sight of the fact that we don't really know that future vocabulary. And I think I found in some of the young people today, well, like Terry here in the front row, Terry Glassman, who is attuned to the whole approach of using systems and the logic of systems. And I think young people are being educated today to understand this and to deal with structures in a logical way, in a scientific way, but not losing sight, hopefully, of the aesthetics, the personalized aspects of it. And I think that those who specialize in personalized buildings can contribute to the total picture by their influence. But in terms of the total effect of the future, it's going to be created by the systems people.
I happen to agree. You know, I have a talk. Excuse me.
No, I just say that the systems are only related to economics, Dan. I mean, it's been interesting. We just got back from a trip to China, and in a country where it's not working. Well, anyway, in a country where you would assume that systems would be, you know, the way to solve the problem, where you're housing 1.5 million or 2 million people, you find that where the economics are such that poured-in-place concrete is economically sound, they don't use any precasting at all, or they don't use any kind of a system whatsoever. And so it's kind of strange, in a sense. I was kind of overwhelmed by the idea that here, where one would think, where any architect would think at least, that would be the ideal place for this to take place, whether it be in mainland China or in Hong Kong, where all this housing is going on. It's not happening at all. It has nothing to do with systems. And so I think in our country, whether systems evolve commercially, for one, which I think is more possible at this point than residentially, but at least if they do, it'll only be, I think it all ends up being an economic situation. And that, I don't know, that in itself is something I think we have to kind of look at. Because I think many of us up here have thought about industrialization for a long time. I think most architects have and do, and yet Cal is sort of talking from the other point of view. I think I visited probably the same new towns, and then you start to wonder, you know, the housing doesn't thrill you particularly. I think most new towns are too small, so they're deadly in themselves, so therefore there's no life. And it's kind of tough all the way around. Being just in Tokyo a few weeks ago, some of us looked at each other and we said, well, you know, there's the future, and if that's the future, do we really want to be a part of it? Because Tokyo probably has one of every building type, system, what have you, in the whole goddamn world. And it's an exciting city to walk around and be around in. However, I think it's probably, as Cal said, it's probably gone beyond the level of human involvement in total. It's exciting, but yet I don't know what it means in a total lifestyle. So, you know, it's that, I think we're kind of mixed. We're in between here, and the only thing I feel is I don't think the answer is to go back to traditional architecture. I mean, I think those who are advocating, you know, bring back the columns and bring back that garbage, I question that whole process unless really the public they could consider that romantic. I don't really, I mean, that's the part that really bothers me.
Let me mention one thing. Many of you are young, and I know we learn what we read in the newspapers or hear from Bernard or things like this. And I want you not to be deceived. No, I remember there was a very exciting house built, and I can't quite remember the date, maybe someone will, when Charles Eames built his first house with the backing of John Intenza and Arts and Architecture and all. And I was very young, bushy-tailed, still tearing around with hair, and tore down there and to see this house being built at 49, thank you. And the excitement of the house and the magazine and the word and to all of us was this was a truly industrialized house. Bullshit, again. That house was put together like an exquisite piece of jewelry. Every plaster wall I watched was rubbed and then laid over with hands with beautiful pieces of canvas to make it perfectly smooth. Everything about it was an exquisite piece of hand craftsmanship. And even though a certain industrial sash was used and so forth, and I have almost definitive proof that the house at that time cost $35 a square foot, when conventional construction was around $8, which we were building some very romantic little wooden houses, about $8 a square foot. I couldn't help, and I still remain, a little bit skeptical. And I wonder about this point is, you know, what does industrialization or systems, what does it mean in terms of design? And again, not from the point of view of its quaint Japanese things, but I think many of us at that time, many had been, I had not, to Japan, and were very much excited by the philosophy of the Japanese house. Here was a house that was completely systems concept. Right. Perfect, with total flexibility and great creativity and a marvelous system. I don't care what it was made out of, what kind of wood.
That's interesting, you know, because I was really shocked because it was one of the great examples of ad hocism, you know, which was exactly the opposite from what I expected. Yeah. Because, you know, I expected the system.
You mean the city or the house?
No, the housing. I mean, when you said what materials it was made of, and it was really, you know, after looking at Jenks' stuff that he showed when he was around here, and I'm sure at UCLA and other places, but I mean, there was an amazing amount of ad hocism in terms of just tack on, versus...
Well, you don't understand, the Japanese are looking towards America.
No, but it was just, you know...
and that's where they got messed
up.
But
metal, you know, you had a metal cladding, you had a lot of... It was a different kind of a thing than I expected. And not in the, you know, not in the temples, but I'm talking about the housing now. The housing really had a lot of tack on it. And it was a surprise to me, because I've always looked at it just as you did, that, you know, the Japanese had really reached one of the better systems in terms, particularly a wood system, but maybe they have. But I mean, it was strange to see so many different materials and so much sort of individuality expressed within this kind of a system.
It could be that they're losing the strength of their traditions because it's being diluted. Whoops. Because it's being diluted by the other cultures in the world now. And that what you saw is a representation of that.
You know what amazes me about the Japanese, or using them as an example, they have the tatami mats, which is a wonderful system and very romantic for me, you know, and not that it's a total system. Maybe we don't have the total system yet, or the fact that you bring how they polished, you know, Charles Eames beams or what. It's meaningless because when he put the window system in, what was available in a catalog, they put a window system in. Frank Gehry here has been experimenting with that. You know, I think the essence of I don't really understand all of the Ron Davis house, but I like the fact that it's built directly and honestly. And when he wanted to put something on it, he covered it with galvanized metal, you know. And the house was inexpensive, from what I understand. The point is, he used an industrial product like galvanized metal. Now, it's on a wood frame because right now, wood frame is inexpensive, I would imagine. Or you take this building here. What's built here was inexpensive, and it works. Now, take the Japanese. It was amazing to me. About 5 years ago, we had a red-hot architectural firm that made millions. The guy was an SC graduate, and I forget his name. It's best not I not name names because... But the Japanese came here and loved this tract housing, and they decided to hire him to do a housing in Japan. I couldn't believe it. They wanted to take San Fernando Valley dingbat stuff to Japan, because that's what the Japanese thought were good, because they just love Americans. They love them blindly. You know, now there's a Japanese architect by the name of Kurokawa. I don't know if any of you know Kurokawa's work, but there's a guy that's really experimenting with industrialization. Now, the fact that he's not building billion units doesn't really matter right now. You know, what matters is that there's a thought and a direction. And we might, you know, it might not work, but he's doing it. And there's a group of people doing it in the United States, like the trailer industry.
No, but Kirk, that was another shock to me, because other than the one modular, you know, building that he plugged in, there's nothing else. And at this point in time, what's going on in Japanese architecture relates to Eastern United States. They're doing it in brick, and they're going exactly the opposite from the industrialization that I thought existed. And when you really go there and look, and you've been there, but
Yeah.
but there's hardly any industrialization. From what I thought there'd be a lot, but there
Well, you
isn't
see-
any at all.
see,
and what isn't really that fantastic anyway. But,
See, I think it's what you see. It's your mind decides what you want to
but
see.
I'm a pro-industrialist.
Yeah, I know you are, but...
Doing sticky architecture.
Right.
Sticky
You know,
or
like,
stinky?
I went to Japan in 1970 to see Expo 70. And it's interesting, the space frame built, you know, by Tange was a space frame, real heavy structure, you know, in tubes. It was a beautiful thing to see. But one of the best buildings there was Kurokawa's building for a cosmetic company, which were all these tubes and pipes, and they plug in. And I only saw that. You see, I didn't see what you call the Bangkok Temple or Bangkok Pavilion or the Thailand Pavilion, which was like a temple built out of metal. You know, that's what the Bangkok people did. You know, I just don't look at those things anymore. You know, I see it, or I choose not to look at dingbat housing. I want to live a positive program. So if I see an Airstream trailer, even though I know it wasn't designed, you know, for the current waves of Airstream, I love it. You know what I mean? I say, oh, there goes another guy of the future. Or I'm buying a new car. I'm buying a new car, and I decided, I said, before I bought this car, I said, I know I should get a Honda Civic. I just know I should have a Honda Civic. And God darn it, I bought a Peugeot, you know, because I'm still hung up, you know. But the point is, that doesn't eliminate the fact of the Honda Civic being the car. And when I get a kick out of Honda Civics is I see all the bright colors. And I see a guy paint a scene on it, you know, and I see, wow, we're still having individuality with an industrialized product. You see, we don't have to destroy our self-existence of self by having industrialized product. We seem to do it for chairs. You know, these chairs we sit on, you know, right now, you might say, well, they're not industrialized because they're not made out of metal. What do you call these, executive chairs? Are fantastic. Director's chairs, fantastic buy. Used to be buy them for $9. And somebody figured out they're still only $9 and you could drop the price. But they found out they were in demand, so they decided to raise the price, you see. But it's stamped out, it's moved on, and we do it. We can buy ashtrays that look good, and we're all happy about it, or felt tip pins, you know, with bright colors, and we're all happy. But as soon as we talk about our housing, as soon as we talk about something like a bathroom, you know, I mean, a bathroom is to go in and get out, you know, it's not to play with yourself,
Yes,
you see?
I don't agree.
Some people like to play with themselves.
Don't knock it. Well, there are a lot of good things can go on in a bathroom. No, I don't mean to turn into a kind of an argument here, but I only will raise a question, and there's no way for you to answer. I just talk to an awful lot of people and young people and a lot of kids in school, and they come in, and when they think of pursuing the life that we live today, and if you project it and extrapolate it down the line all the way, they find it very unacceptable. I don't happen to envy you. If we say that the future is an extrapolation of the commercial industrialism of today, I think that's kind of a sad thing, and I regret it for you if it goes that way. Myself, sorry, Bernie, and because I think there's more to a bathroom than just 3 plumbing fixtures. And I think there's more to a house than just an industrial process. And I think there's more to life than just mechanization. And I think all of those things are extremely valuable, useful, meaningful tools as a means to an end. But what is the end? And the end is the quality of your life. And I don't think that we have got a very clear vision of what the quality of our lives should be about. And that's what I think is our big problem today. If we knew where we wanted to go, maybe we would be able to get there. This is a big question. Do we know? Pierre, what do you think? You're a good industrial man.
Well, quite frankly, I was a little bit surprised when Shelly Kappe asked me to come tonight and explain the topic. And she said, the modern movement is dead. It's like saying I'm dead, too, And everything is gone, and where have we been? And golly, I hadn't really thought of myself or things that way. I thought I was still working in the industrialized modern movement or whatever. And as I listen to everybody talking, I find it very difficult to understand what they're saying, and I don't understand the words and all that stuff. I don't know what romanticism is. I don't know what industrialization is. I also think that, and this is kind of connected, wait a minute, the architect today, or any time, doesn't sit back and wait for a client to come knocking on the door. I think the whole modern movement is a continuum, and I think the problem here tonight is that we're looking at this modern movement in the post-World War II as being a unique phenomenon. In some ways it is, and in some ways it's not. Now, for a person to survive in modern technological industrialized world that you're in, one has to adapt and deal with it as times change. And looking back, so 10, 20 years ago, so long time ago, I have difficulty in looking back that close and trying to define what happened way back then. I mean, it's not way back then to me, so I'm not in a position to make those kinds of opinions about it, and let somebody else do that. But what I do think is the spirit that took place during that time is still alive. I think we have to apply the same spirit to a different set of conditions, and I think we should probably be here tonight trying to define the state we're in now. I say try because I don't think we can do it, but I think I don't want to leave the students with a pessimistic attitude. I do feel sorry for you in a way because there's not the opportunity for the great individualism. And again, I say there were certain individuals after World War II that did a lot of things you could point to them. Today, that part is gone. Things are too complicated, too complex. There are too many things going on for one person to handle. It takes a group of people, so more than one. And in that sense, we lost something. In the other sense, we're going to gain something. Now, what that new thing is coming up, I don't know. But I do think it's probably, in its own way, as exciting now, and we don't know it, as it was then, 20 years ago, that we now know. We didn't know it then either. We didn't know what was happening then. We don't know what's happening now. At any given time, we'd have to be geniuses to be able to determine where we are at this given time. We can't do it. And I think to throw it around is, in a sense, a waste of time. I think we could spend our time defining the conditions. And I think, to start with, I think you don't look at necessarily architecture. I never looked at architecture for any of my answers. Anyway, I never found any since Gothic period. I never found any answers to architecture.
I've been around though.
And this all seems to be, kind of hodgepodge since then. But so we draw from outside, and we draw from outside and we see the state the country is in at this moment. Now, just because we're in a state at this moment doesn't necessarily mean anything. Life is a series of cycles that go up and down, and I think we're in a little trough right now. And I think the whole thing is part of a larger picture, a larger continuum, larger waves. I think I'm not dead yet. You're not. None of you are. I think we don't know yet what the results of our work is. I think it's too premature. Maybe we'll be proved right, and maybe we'll be proved wrong. But I don't think we can sit up here right now and say so. But what I do think an architect has to do is approach the conditions as he or she sees it at the moment, and be in touch with the times and try to solve those problems then. And again, I don't tend to sit around and wait for a client to come knocking for the door. I don't start problems when the doorbell rings. The client says, "Here's your fee. Now start on industrialization of housing or something else." You know, you work on it. You work on it. You spend your life. You sleep on it. You spend your spare time. If you don't have any jobs, you work theoretical problems on a piece of paper. Someday, you know, the opportunity is going to arrive, or you make the opportunity. The architect has to create and generate the need for things to transpire. I agree with Dick when he said that you have to. I lost my train of thought. You have to be, the architect has to be in a decision-making role, and I think the architects have dropped that. They're not in the places to make the decisions. They sit back and they wait for somebody else to make the decision. Then they act. They're reactionaries in that sense. I think this partly goes to the AIA and the institutionalized role of architects in the country, and the individual finds it difficult to fight against this. However, that doesn't mean that you guys and gals don't have to fight for it. So I think we adapt ourselves, continue fighting to solve some of the problems. Industrialization is a problem, not a solution. I mean, I never thought in the beginning that I invented industrialization. I know none of us did. It happened, and it's a condition. And given that thought, then the question is, how do you handle it? You know, not is industrialization good, or is it bad, or this good? What are you going to do with it? It's coming. You know, it's all over. It's the life we're living in, the world we're living in. It's getting more. What do you do about it? And is the architect going to do anything about it, or somebody else can do something about it? That's, you know, these are the kinds of things I think we have to try to identify and cope with them or not.
But in one sense, you're saying you're waiting to respond to society and what's going on in society. In the other sense, you're saying you're ready to give them what you already have decided what should be given before you're ready to respond. And I don't quite understand. There seems to be a dichotomy in that.
I didn't intend to say any of those things.
You didn't say either of those?
I think the architect or designer, whoever he is, has to be aware of the world in which he lives, or she lives, number one, and cope with the problems in a sensible way as he or she perceives them. Then has to get he or she in a role where the problem solutions can be generated and not wait around for someone else to come along and say, would you please solve this problem? And doing those two things, then I think the architect can get back into the mainstream of society. I think just simply to say, well, I don't like industrialization, let's not do it, is say nothing. I mean, it's around.
Can I raise a point?
We're in it. Look, wait a minute. How can you say it? We're in a building. This is a result of industrialization. People are sitting in chairs. You're sitting in chairs. The clothes you're wearing, the car you drive, everything around you is a result of industrialization done by someone else. Charlie Eames may have designed the first one, personality, designed that chair. Someone else has come along and capitalized on that design and produced that chair. It's a long way around getting to these kinds of chairs, but it all comes from the same source, the generation of an idea, and that's what's important.
Let me see if I can just raise one small question here, although I don't think it's small. There was a moment in time when all of us suddenly felt that mass production was the hope of the future. If you've read Bellamy and many of the philosophers, end of the 19th, early 20th century, if we could produce enough bathtubs, produce enough automobiles, we could solve the problems of the world. And maybe we were all very strongly socialist, if you will, or what, in this direction, but we really believed in mass production, and this is in a sense what I'm calling industrialization, as the thing that would solve the problem of the world. I don't know about you, but I look around and see that I'm the victim of this production. I'm the victim of these things.
You choose to be the victim of it.
Okay.
You choose. You control your own destiny.
But I'm right at the moment in my own life where I think I'm about to kick it off. And that's my choice. I raise the question with a lot of people when they now have 4 cars. Somebody called me up today and said, come visit me, I have 4 automobiles. Jesus, how vulgar, how impossible. Yes, it does. Because the original thing of Henry Ford said, if I can produce that thing for everyone in the world, everyone's going to be happy, we'll have cars, and the American public will be liberated. We can move anywhere, we are free. And the question is, does that really bring this promise of happiness, which is maybe romantic? I don't think so. I think this is what everyone searches for. And I'm not sure that it has really done its job. And I think all the lemmings have a bully old time rushing madly forward, and very seldom, and that's progress, and they're going full tilt forward, and they go off the cliff. And do any lemmings ever stop and say, what's going on?
Yeah, but that's a terribly conceited attitude to take, to think that you or any other architect or people in our position are causing all this.
No, I don't say that. I'm merely saying that there was a moment a few years ago where enough people, and maybe you take exception to this, rose up and challenged a war, a condition, screamed about it, yelled about it, until even people who were not conscious of it woke up to the fact
Well, this
and changed it.
industrialist was involved with that movement.
All right,
I
I understand.
You see?
But I'm also
And I'm a
saying,
romantic.
I'm saying though, that if enough people do not find this thing satisfactory and do not find that promise of happiness, maybe they will cease sitting in the produced chairs. Maybe they will find another answer.
I think we're getting, what we do is, there's a thing in psychology called confusion delusion. When we can't really, understand the situation, we sort of confuse the situation. There's no relationship to industrialization and the war. Industrialization, like Pierre said, is going to take place. It's taking place. It's going to flow, long as there's an economical demand. Now, it's interesting to see what Ray said about China, because what it makes me believe, I have a friend named Art Silvers who's very involved with the black movement, and Art was always picking on me because I was always going to solve housing by industrialization and then allow people to do what they want to do. I don't think you have to go to work. You work because you want to work. We're all tied up. If you don't want to go to work, you can go to meetings. You can have lectures all the time. You can be at SCI-Arc. Okay. But Art said, Bernard, you can't have industrialized housing right now because it's going to affect the black people, because we need social housing. And social housing is to teach them a trade so they feel part of it. And that's one way. And that can work. In other words, if a guy wants to really build, housing, and pound 2x4s, and that's what he really wants to do, by all means do it. You don't even have to do it because we need housing, just do it. But if he really wants to spin pottery, or the woman wants to go to Women's Village and learn about the essence of self, fine, do that. So when I hear about the Chinese, still doing those techniques, it probably means to me that they want to keep everybody employed, because labor is free. We wonder how Candela did all these wonderful things in Mexico and why they're not happening today. Well, I talked to Felix Candela about a year ago at Aspen, and he said, what happened is the labor market went up and I didn't have all this labor anymore. So I couldn't do the same thing that I did at the University of Mexico. There's a thing called social housing, or keep people to work to keep them to work. And that's okay if that's what we want. See, I choose not to pound 2x4s. I choose not to garden. I choose to go to lectures. I choose to sit around in coffee shops and talk to people. And I feel that that's okay. If I can afford it and I can do it, that's fine. And it's not I'm not being penalized for the fact that I want an industrialized product. Like for instance, I've been thinking of that case study house that I wanted to build, which I was going to build in the factory, and I couldn't get the financing and couldn't understand it. Well, I thought of getting a trailer and putting it at the bottom of the lot and live in the trailer to experience it, and go through the experiential thing. Now, I know that's not a pure industrialized product yet, but that doesn't matter yet. We're still in the stage of its beginning. The Charles Eames house that you talk about, that's a beginning. I understand in England, what's the DA, or what's the magazine in England? AD, Architectural Design, AD. They had a reoccurrence of the publication of the Eames house, and it was the hottest stuff around, that it revitalized the thinking. Eames was right. When I look back, which I try not to do, I don't see the Holly Bush house. I see Schindler becoming pure. When I look back, I look at the Paxton Palace and look at not the decoration on it, but the purity of that industrialized system. When I go to San Francisco and they say, I've always liked the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and I thought beautiful structure, beautiful integrity. Someone said, well, did you know they have decoration along the side? Well, then they really screwed me up for a while because I didn't see the structure, I saw the decoration. And I got wise. I said, I choose not to see the decoration and see the purity of the structure. When I look back, I see Soriano, I see Conrad Waxman, I see Craig Elwood, I see Pierre Koenig. You see, I remember having a conversation with Ray when he did the competition for what's the Sacramento Civic Center? Governor's Mansion. And sure enough, it was green in the middle of it, trusses. And I said, Ray, what are you going to do that for? What do you want to do that for? And I think the height of Ray's expression was when he started bringing the two together, like in his own house, where he has these concrete forms, and he puts, blue laminated beams in between and spans in between. Well, whether it's a wood beam and 2x12s or versus a steel product, doesn't matter. There's a system going on there. And I don't know, I'd like to share this, Ray. I talk to Ray to clear my head a lot because he really clears it. Does a lot of good. And a year ago, I had gotten a sabbatical and I decided to work on industrialized research, industrialized housing. And I told Ray that's what I wanted to do and still holding on to it. And I think, Ray, you said to me that you wouldn't mind giving up your house in order to produce a product like that. And I told Ray's the kind of guy that, he says he's going to build a school, he's going to build a school. There's no two ways about it. Ray Kappe says he's going to build a house that's beautiful, he's going to build a house. I mean, that's the difference between Ray Kappe and Bernard Zimmerman. Bernard Zimmerman dreams, Ray Kappe does. You see? And when Ray Kappe said he was going to produce an industrialized house, I really think he's going to, you see? And I don't know if your head's there now, but if it is, I think it would be nice if you shared it because I think it's an interesting thought.
Well, I shared it a year ago to the students, and I haven't produced yet, so I'm waiting for the next year.
Well, what is it? Do you still feel it
No, at the time, I think the last time I presented at the school, we usually the faculty present here each year just to say where you are and where your head is and so forth. And at that time, I think I said this is sort of the last of my wood house era, since I share the attitude of many here about technology. At least I used to. I'm not sure right now. And and part of it was that I really felt that as Bernard expressed earlier, that the mobile home industry was the only industry that was meeting the low-cost house, which was always the challenge that I felt was one that architects should meet, and that's to be involved not with individual high-cost housing, which I continued to be a part of, but really how do you solve the problem of the majority of the people? And it seemed to me that the mobile house was the only one, except that I really also felt that the way it was produced was not satisfactory in my eyes. And so in a way I was kind of dropping back, I think, to the early 50s, Cal, when the housing that existed then wasn't satisfactory in most of our eyes, and so we're looking for other solutions. And I decided that maybe the way to look at these other solutions would be through the mobile house. And I started to work on this process to do one that I had hoped to produce. And part of it went along with the desire in SCI-Arc also to purchase some additional acreage so that we could do more experimental projects, and this was going to be one of them. And I still feel somewhat strongly about this. However, in the recent periods of time, I start to wonder, again, I think some of the questions that have been brought up tonight about whether architects any longer should really look at the idea of solving the universal problem, which I think is a little naive. It took me 25 years to come to this conclusion. And I think I think there's a market, that's a way. The mobile home is a part. The very luxurious house is also a part. Those who are looking at other things, okay, I guess they still exist. And I think probably if I had to sum up my attitudes, first of all, I think I felt like many people here that in 1950 I was going to solve the problems of the world and had a great social consciousness, which I still do, but I thought the architect role was greater than it really truly is. And I think the reality that exists is that we play a part in society, and we play it and do it at whatever level we feel is right. And so those who are here who are technologists tonight will still look for technology. Those who are looking for the desire to respond to the client and their needs and not participate any more than that will probably continue to do rather satisfactory but maybe mundane products. I don't agree with Pierre that individuality doesn't exist any longer. I've seen our students go out, and I've seen many of them doing very good work at the present time, and with much more individuality, or as much as was going on in the early 50s. And even though I professed also that it didn't seem like that period would come again, that we were going to always be doing projects in teams, et cetera, that this period has clients who want this individuality. So that will continue to go on. And so I think we're really in a world that allows a great deal. And I think that's pretty good, particularly coming out of China a week ago. And I think it's exciting. And I think that I guess the world will continue in some cases to respond, as Dick has said. We'll use technology, as Dan has said. We'll be romantics, as Cal has said. We'll be technologists, as some of us have professed. But I do think that maybe the niceness of our society is the fact that we can all do kind of what we want to do, and we're not going to solve all the problems. We'll solve some of them, and we'll solve them at the best level we can. So I'm continuing to search because I like to start, and I like to look and feel like I'm beginning again, because otherwise you die. And wherever that is, I think it's perfectly okay. So I don't know if that's a sum up, but if somebody wants to come on top of that, that's okay. Dan or Dick, if you want to say anything. Okay, so good night. Any questions?
Shelly, can I propagandize a bit? Over in the bushes, we are involved in solar concerns, and there is a public program on solar energy application. Good program. Be delighted to pass as many of these out as I can. I think the date is very soon, November 6th and 7th. But anyone who would like to see these here, I'm glad to have you over. Thank you.
And next week, November 3rd, we have our next session, so please come back.
Good session.